It's never easy being the first person to do something, and building a tiny house is no exception, which is why it was such a remarkable achievement when Tiny Abode was completed in 2015. Today we've travelled to Yerrinbool in New South Wales to see the finished project. G'day Reese!
G'day Bryce, how are you mate?
Good mate, how are you going?
I'm fantastic, great to have you here.
Thank you very much, it's great to be here. Especially because this tiny house has a very special background, doesn't it? This is actually the very first tiny house to have ever been completed in Australia, right?
We believe so, yes. We finished it about 2 years ago now. It's been living here and having a great view ever since.
And to this date, I think it's also still one of the smallest.
We still haven't found anything smaller than ours anywhere in the world that we can find a record of that contains everything you need to live in permanently full-time.
And so how big is this one actually?
It's 3.6 metres long, about 2 metres wide, and stands just shy of 4 metres tall.
What is the weight of this tiny house?
Would be just a fraction over 2 tonnes.
So also really easy to tow then?
Absolutely, your average family sedan can tow it with no troubles whatsoever.
And what was the reason for wanting to build it so compact and so lightweight?
It was about proving what can be done. Just how small a tiny house can you build and still have it feel like you're in a home. What made me fall in love with tiny houses was the thought, or the realization of just how excessively all of us live, and shows just what is needed in life. I think wants and needs are often a grey area or a bit in the fuzz in the modern world, and it's important to see, to get back to what it is that you need to survive in your life and to be happy.
So what actually inspired you to do this project?
My friend Rebecca, with whom I built it, came to me with this idea, and she said one day, gee, wouldn't it be great if we could do this? And always the optimist, I turned around and said, well, we could. I didn't think we would, but we can, and we did. And it all sort of snowballed out of control from there. The next week there was plans drawn, and then we bought a trailer a week after that, and steel started arriving, and it started taking shape all very quickly.
So what were the materials that this was constructed from?
We've got a roll-formed steel frame cladded on the outside with colour-bond steel to make sure it would last in the Australian environment as long as possible, and inside's all lined with tongue and groove dressed timber panelling to make sure that it doesn't crack with any movement while we're moving along. Being that we were one of the first tiny houses to be built in Australia, every industry we contacted looking for advice or design or consultation had never heard of tiny houses before, and we sounded like university students that were on some sort of project that wouldn't result in a sale to them. So it was very difficult to have industry take us seriously, that we were there money in hand, ready to actually produce something. We overcame these obstacles by looking for upstart companies and people that were emerging technologies, like the steel frame we've used to build the whole building. It was all designed on the computer and sort of printed out of a machine like a giant Meccano set. And this sort of CNC roll forming technology was quite new. And subsequently it was an industry manned by very young people that were ahead of the curve and were there seeing that tiny houses were a real possibility to take off, and happy to be a part of that new trend.
The design of this house is really nice. You can see that a lot of thought's actually gone into a lot of things like the symmetry in the design.
Rebecca is all about form, whereas I'm all about function, and between the two of us it meant that we ended up with something that was practical and yet really aesthetically pleasing as well. Things like symmetry and high ceilings and open spaces and lots of windows and natural light from all sides help you to feel like you're not hemmed in. And when you're in a space that is smaller than a lot of people's bathrooms or a lot of bedrooms are, and you're going to be living there permanently and doing everything in that space, you need to make sure that you can have it feel as open as possible whilst still staying in the smallest possible footprint.
Well, I am very interested to see inside and how you've managed to fit it all in.
No worries, come on in.
Thank you very much. Now, this little stable door that you've got here is a really cool feature, isn't it?
That was an absolute must for Beck. She said at all costs the tiny house must have a stable door so that you can have the light coming in even when the door is closed. She's got a small dog, and it was important that we were able to keep little Tonks in the house if Beck was having a nap or whatever, and still be able to get that breeze right through.
Definitely a very compact tiny house. Tell me about the space and how you've made everything work.
All right, well, you're standing here in the great room now with our vaulted ceilings that are nearly 4 meters high and our bookshelves adorning the walls. It was important that we had spaces that felt open inside the tiny home. So while you're here, you've got the lounge to recline on, read your book and spend your time, and laying down and looking up to the ceiling, it seems to be even higher than that than you'd find in a normal home. We've also got our fantastic dining space down here. The table flips up from the ground. So while we were designing the space, we worked out which spaces were higher priority and gave them more room. Kitchen had to be big enough that one person could work in there quite easily and could be assisted and still have sufficient space. So we made sure the sink was in a position where somebody could be next to you drying without, again, feeling like you're hemmed in all the time.
So what are these hooks up here for?
They're one of our other sort of little design cues. While we were building the tiny house, Beck discovered hammocks and how fantastic they are for your back and just great fun to sleep in and have around. And so halfway through the build, Beck says to me, we've got to have a hammock in the tiny house. After measuring out the length of the building, it worked out 3.6 meters as the ideal length to hang a proper sized hammock over. So of course it had to be in here. So we put these hooks up so you can hang a hammock straight through the hallway and sleep another person.
You can never go wrong with a hammock in a tiny house.
Absolutely. The bathroom would be what I would call a micro bathroom. We managed to condense that into a space smaller than I've ever seen. Portable toilets are larger than our bathroom. So it really is a condensed space, but there's plenty of room for an average sized person to move around and have their shower without being impeded by the small space.
Well, can we see the bathroom and how that all works then?
Sure can, just down the hall. All right, Bryce, here is our micro bathroom.
It is tiny.
It really is, but we managed to squeeze in here everything that you need in your bathroom, from a vanity cupboard or mirrored vanity cupboard to keep all your toiletries and that sort of thing, right through to a toilet and, of course, the ever-important shower. The original plan called for a composting toilet, but in its current usage here as an Airbnb rental, we found a chemical toilet was more user-friendly. We made sure there was a window in the bathroom. We felt if there wasn't, you would feel like you were standing in a closet, and we wanted to make sure that you were still connected to the outside world. We went with Colorbond again in the bathroom. It's a super cheap product that is really, really easy to work with and very easy to waterproof. It's been going for 2 years now and we haven't had a leak. We haven't had a complaint. It's easy to clean. Zinc-Alume doesn't breed mold or anything like that. Been really hygienic and easy to work with.
And I noticed that in this shower you've only got cold water as well. How's that working out?
Correct. There is nothing like a cold shower to remind you that you just don't need hot water. It's not good for your skin anyway. And the cold water spraying off your body cools the whole shower space as well. So even if it's, the hot days, you've come out of the dam from a swim or whatever, it's no better place to cool down than in a cold shower in a tiny little Colorbond bathroom.
So what about the water storage or electricity? Where does all that come from here?
Okay, so on site we're lucky enough to have access to bore water as well as town power. There is a 200 litre water tank under the front of the house for if you are travelling or if you're in an off-grid situation. We also do have gutters that can be attached to the side to capture the rainwater and funnel it into the tank if you were trying to live totally off the grid and not refilling at any sort of place. The solar power could be attached quite easily. There is room in the toolbox at the front for all of the equipment, although because we've always been in an area where we've had town power available and our consumption in here is so low that our environmental impact from using town power is as minimal as it can be.
And then there's the sleeping loft upstairs. How is that accessed?
Alright, so our ladder just lives behind the wardrobe here, comes out and slots onto these two pegs here, with the clips on the side to stop it sliding on the floor.
Great.
And up we go.
A super cozy loft space up here.
Welcome.
What size is the loft?
Again, 2 meters wide, and it would be about 1.5 meters in total height.
It really is amazing when you think of the amount of space that you have to work with, how you've been able to create so many zones in the house that all feel kind of separate in their own way, but all function together.
It was really important to us that 2 people could live here comfortably. As much as it would be an awesome space for 1 person, it had to be workable for 2 people. And whilst we were building, the loft was one of the first sections of the house to go in. And it was after a few days spent at the end of the day, just doing a little bit of reading or just generally hanging out of the house after building, that I would lay up here and Beck would lay sort of in a space quite near where the lounge is. And we'd be reading quite separately, but still only a phrase away from that connection with another person. And so we made sure there was a good connection between the resting areas so that people could still have that low-level conversation.
So have you done much travel in the tiny house yet?
We have. We've done a couple of trips up and down the coast in it, as well as tripping around to schools and that sort of thing, showing off what we've done and what is possible. And it tows along quite nicely. We tow it behind our Holden Commodore. Having
been in the space for a while and experienced it on the road, is there anything to this design that you would change?
I think next time around we would make it just a touch longer, which would have given us just a little bit extra bench space in the kitchen, as well as stretched out the bathroom just a little bit more. Both those spaces are perfectly adequate as they are, but we always travel with a group of people, and we sort of use the tiny abode as our base camp or our hub, and everyone will camp around it. So the kitchen, we've cooked for 10 and 15 people in our tiny little kitchen, and because of the way we use it, another couple of 100 mils of bench space would have been excellent.
So what was the final budget for this build?
We've spent just a touch under $20,000. The only trade we had to employ was an electrician. Of course, electricity is not something that you want to be making mistakes with, but everything else from carpentry to colour bond and even the plumbing is all stuff that can be tackled by your average DIYer, and you'll be surprised what you can learn on YouTube. When you build a tiny house, there is an element of family involved. It's never just a one person's build. Mums, dads, cousins, grandmas, grandpas are all involved. So there's certainly a social component that goes along with building a tiny home. We've made friends all over the country and indeed all over the world, just through the spread of the tiny home movement. People, whether they want to be involved or build their own or simply just share their kudos at people taking on the world of excess and trying to cut down and take only what we need from the world.
You've got a really great result from this build. I'm super impressed with just how much functionality you have managed to put into such a small space. Congratulations.
Thanks very much, Bryce.
Of all of the tiny houses that I visit, I'm most interested in these really compact versions that really show you how much functionality you can cram into a very small space. And especially as I'm sitting here in this tiny house hammock, I'm reminded that you can build small and still add a touch of luxury. Our show is made with the help of fan funding via Patreon. If you enjoy the show and would like to help us produce more episodes, visit patreon.com/livingbig to find out more.